Imagine watching a dramatic video. It's a small boat that's ablaze upon open water. You have a surge of emotions, maybe fear, anger, or perhaps even righteous indignation. But you must ask yourself, is what you're seeing the full story, or is it just a version that someone else wants you to believe? Welcome to The Fracture. Today, we'll be talking about media manipulation and how emotional storytelling helps shape public perception, and why that matters. We'll explore the recent U.S. military attacks off the coast of Latin America and how different narratives were presented and what this teaches us about emotional influence in the media. There's two sides to every story. We're going to go back to the small boat scenario. Imagine this. The small boat explodes out at sea. One media outlet reports this as a crew of narco-terrorists supplying drugs to the United States, while another claims that the boat carried humble fishermen, poor laborers with no ties to the drug cartels. The visuals are identical, but your emotional reaction is very different. This is how media manipulation works. It doesn't just inform you, it frames how you feel. And your feelings can shape public opinion, policy, and even the justification of military action. Let's first consider the human perspective. These could be innocent workers, victims of circumstance. Yet official statements labeled them as narco terrorists to justify the strikes and showed you dramatic explosions on the news. Emotionally speaking, this story provokes grief and moral outrage. It humanizes the victims. It invites skepticism of the military operations and highlights legal and ethical concerns. Now imagine that this intelligence is correct, and these vessels did operate with armed cartel members smuggling drugs to the United States. Here, the strikes are preventative. The explosions elicit relief. Lives at home are safer, and law enforcement is making decisive actions. Now, both of these are presented with the same exact footage. They show the exact same event. Yet they produce completely opposite emotions depending upon the narrative. This is the dual power of emotional media framing. So, if you're watching this and it's not 2025, I'll give you a little bit of context. U.S. military strikes targeted several boats off the coast of Latin America. The government called these counter narcotics missions and claimed that the boats carried narcotics and were being supplied by cartels. But the story the public perceived depended heavily on how it was presented. And this is where media manipulation comes in. So, what is media manipulation? Let's look at 5 key ways that your emotions can be shaped. The first tactic is selective imagery. The Pentagon released dramatic clips of boats exploding in fire and smoke. These visuals provoked shock, fear, and moral urgency, even before anyone examined the facts. Meanwhile, the footage of small, unarmed fishing boats is rarely shown, which could evoke feelings of sympathy instead. Media chooses what you see, and your emotions respond first and logic responds second. The second tactic that they use is labeling and framing. Officials called the crews narco terrorists, emphasizing danger and criminality. Other sources, including families and activists, describe some people as humble fishermen, barely making $100 a month. The emotional reaction depends solely on which label they use. One evokes outrage, the other evokes empathy. The next tactic used is omission. Many media reports left out crucial details, including intelligence uncertainty, the lack of legal due process, or even the probability of civilian casualties. When you don't see the full picture, it's easy to accept the narrative presented to you. And then we have moral framing. The strikes are framed as necessary for national security, a fight against dangerous criminal organizations threatening the U.S. When actions are presented as morally righteous, your protective instinct kicks in, and support often follows even when legal and ethical questions still remain. The last tactic used is repetition. These clips weren't just shown once, they were shown over and over. They appeared in multiple reports and headlines over days or even weeks. Repetition embeds the narrative in your mind. It normalizes the events and strengthens the emotional response. And critical questions fade into the background. The more you see it, the more it feels justified. Taken together, these tactics didn't just report to you the 2025 boat strikes. They told you how to feel about them. Some viewers felt relief that a threat was neutralized, while others felt that innocent lives were lost. The very same event produces completely opposite emotions depending on how it was presented. This is not a new phenomenon. It's been happening since the beginning of humanity. It's just become easier now that the internet allows us to disseminate information faster. Historical examples include Operation Mockingbird, copaganda, and fear based political ads. All of these cases were emotionally guided public perception. This is a complicated issue. The U.S. is trying to stop imports of drugs, but some independent reporters and eyewitnesses' accounts suggest that at least some of the boats carried Venezuelan fishermen, far removed from cartel operations. This raises urgent questions. When dramatic visuals are paired with strong labels, how much of our emotional reaction is tied to reality and how much of the narrative is carefully curated by the authorities? Transparency is very limited. Much of the intelligence underpinning these strikes comes from secretive agencies. Details on how these targets were identified, what evidence existed, or whether judicial oversight even occurred remain classified. This secrecy magnifies emotional impact, and the public reacts to the immediate drama, not the legal or ethical uncertainties behind it. And polling data reflects this tension. A majority of Americans supported the strikes when it was framed as a defensive action against drug traffickers. But when asked about the legality or morality of killing suspected traffickers abroad without due process, support drops to just 29%. This gap demonstrates the power of emotional framing. What we feel about an event often depends less on facts and more about how it was presented to us. The 2025 boat strikes serve as a stark example of how media framing can both justify and obscure. Explosions on videos evoke immediate fear and moral approval. Omitted text and hidden intelligence processes, along with selective labeling, shape public opinion, even when the reality on the ground is far more complex. So let's talk about the broader patterns of media. The same event can provoke grief or reassurance. Media doesn't just report facts, it guides emotions. Some other examples of this include Operation Mockingbird. Now, this was just straight up Cold War propaganda against journalists. The CIA reportedly recruited journalists, editors, and major news organizations to publish U.S. narratives and anti communist messaging. This included both print and broadcast outlets. Stories shape public perceptions to align with U.S. geopolitical goals without the audience knowing the source or the intent. It blurred the line between independent journalism and state influence. It also demonstrated how media can be subtly manipulated for political purposes. The military media industrial complex promotes coverage that emphasizes strategy and necessity over civilian costs. It describes the relationship between the military, defense contractors, and media outlets. News coverage often emphasizes military heroism, effectiveness, and strategic necessity, while downplaying civilian casualties, logistical failures, or even ethical concerns. By framing these actions as necessary or even heroic, media reinforces the public support for defensive spending, internationalist policies, and foreign conflicts, often without full transparency or even the risk of consequences. And then there's copaganda, which paint police in a heroic light while minimalizing systemic failures. This is media coverage that consistently portrays police in a positive or heroic light, often emphasizing human interest stories or acts of bravery. They usually focus on individual officer heroism, like saving the day or community service, while minimalizing coverage of systemic issues like misconduct, excessive force, or racial bias. This generates public trust in law enforcement and reduces the scrutiny of policies or practices that might be harmful. It emotionally reinforces the idea that police are protectors, which can obscure broader institutional problems. And then we have fearmongering. Fearmongering presents itself in politics like the 1964 Daisy ad during the Lyndon B. Johnson presidential campaign. The Daisy ad showed a small girl on TV counting petals followed by a nuclear explosion. It did not focus on policy details. It instead triggered intense emotional fear about nuclear war if the opponent was elected. The ad is considered a classic example of emotional manipulation that leverages fear to sway votes rather than presenting a rational argument or evidence. Emotional narratives can drive policy, support, legal acceptance, and public perception, often overshadowing logic and nuance. So, why does all this matter? And what can you do? Well, emotional narratives influence policy, cloud the truth, and erode trust. But you can respond critically. Ask questions. What aren't you being shown? And who profits from what you are being shown? Seek diverse sources, independent and international outlets. Demand transparency. Insist that evidence comes along with accountability. Learn about manipulation tactics like fear, framing, and propaganda. Being aware of emotional manipulation is the first step towards seeing the full picture. The 2025 boat strikes show that emotion shapes public perception. The same event can evoke grief or relief, depending on the story being told. Media framing doesn't just reflect reality, it builds it. By questioning, investigating, and seeking deeper coverage, we resist emotionally manipulative narratives. Because truth matters even more than how the story makes us feel. I do want to thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please like, comment, and subscribe, and keep asking the hard questions. It's how we see the full story. If you'd like to know more about political division, manipulation, and all the tactics mentioned in this video, please buy The Fracture: How Political Division is Tearing America Apart on Amazon. You can also visit my website at author billfarley.com.